Welcome to A Fine Time, The Nanny Revisited. This is a podcast about The Nanny, where we recap each episode and then discuss, sharing our own unique take on each episode. I'm Bernadette.
And I'm Debbie. Today we're talking about episode 72, The Cantor Show. As usual, we'll start with a brief summary of the episode. Sylvia and Morty's synagogue has a new, single, and gorgeous cantor. So Fran takes the opportunity to teach Maggie and Gracie how people of other religions pick up men. Unsurprisingly, Fran catches Cantor Gary's attention and they start dating. Burt Bacharach is impressed by Gary and insists on casting him in the new show he's putting on with Maxwell. Gary's Broadway star steadily rises and he gets promoted from a small role to the lead after the original star got hit by a bus. At the Fine family home, Gary gets ready to make a big announcement in front of his Temple family. Much to the Fines' disappointment, he does not ask Fran to marry him. Rather, he announces that he's leaving the Temple to pursue a career on Broadway. Sylvia then gets shunned by her friends, and she warns Fran that ours is not a merciful God. Suddenly, it's been raining for 7 days and 7 nights, and then Gary announces that he's headed to LA to do a part for Andrew Lloyd Webber in Evita. Fran doesn't think God is punishing her until she realizes that she missed the annual sale at Loman's. Fran and Sylvia return to Temple, and Fran realizes that God is punishing her also for scamming an airline that lost her checked bag. So she donates the proceeds of her fraud to the Temple, and suddenly everything rights itself. The episode ends with Fran and Sylvia praying for God to find Fran a doctor to marry. Bernadette, do you want to add anything?
No, that was great.
Thank you. Would you then like to take us to scene 1?
Yes, so we open up in the kitchen. Niles is there. Fran walks in looking very nice. And Niles comments, "Oh, Friday night dressed to kill, going to Temple to pray for a date?"
Exactly.
Which, yes, yes, she is. There's apparently a new cantor at the Temple. He's single and gorgeous. And Fran is hoping for a religious experience.
Mm-hmm.
Niles then asks Fran if in her faith anybody takes a vow of celibacy. And she says, "Just me." um, so Fran also mentions that she's going to take this opportunity to show Maggie and Gracie how they pick up men and how other religions pick up men. And at the same time, though, there comes a letter from the airline. Fran's been told that, the airline couldn't find her baggage. And she says, "Oh, that's why you never pack anything important in there." But Niles points out, well, it's insured up to $500. So, of course, Fran's like, "Except stupid me, that $500 watch."
Exactly.
What $500 watch? The one I'm getting tomorrow? So, Brighton walks through the kitchen, letting, Fran know that he and Maxwell are going to go see the Padres at the Mets. And he walks on through. And so, of course, he's dressed casual, right? Maxwell walks in, and I will say he's dressed up in a tux.
He looks very handsome.
Yes. And he says he and Brighton are going to see, I don't know how to pronounce this. Pagliacci at the Met.
Correct.
So obviously there was a misunderstanding between the two. And of course, Fran comments as she goes to the, refrigerator, "Funny how people hear what they want to hear." And Niles comments, "That's the pitfall of a large house." And Fran looks back. When did Brad Pitt call the house?
Exactly.
So again, falling into that trap of just hearing what you want to hear.
Mm-hmm.
Gracie then walks into the kitchen and she has like a scarf like over her head and she's ready to go to Friday night services. And Fran just comments, that they're not fleeing out of the
Anatevka.
Yeah. Yep. And that's the first scene. Do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I just want to describe Gracie's outfit just a little bit more. She's in like a long sleeve dress and it's like a dark green, I think, and then she has like a teal scarf tie over her head, tied under her chin. She looks like the whole joke is Fiddler on the Roof. She looks like the people fleeing Anatemta.
Yes.
So
Mm-hmm.
that's all
Yep.
I wanted to add.
Okay. Can you take us to scene 2?
Sure. So now we're in the synagogue and we see the cantor and he's singing in Hebrew. And we then turn to Fran and Sylvia and Maggie and Gracie. And Fran comments, "Oh, Ma, is he's hot stuff or what? Look at this. The M&M's melted in my hand." And the woman behind me goes, "Shh." And Sylvia's like, "Calm down. It's in Hebrew. What are you afraid you're going to miss something?" The cantor finishes the prayer and everyone applauds. I've never seen that in synagogue. At just the end of a regular Friday night service, I've never seen them applaud the cantor like that. But some of the women give him a standing ovation. And Fran comments, "All right, it's over. Let the games begin." And so you see this gaggle of women approach the cantor, and Fran's touching up her makeup and she's getting all ready to meet the cantor. And so she says to Gracie, "When you see me talking to the cantor, what are you going to do?" Gracie's like, "I'm going to rush over and say, 'Excuse me, miss, are you Julia Roberts?'" And Fran's like, "Remember, project." And of course, Sylvia's getting ready to, make the play for the cantor also. And Maggie complains that she's starving. She thought it was a Jewish tradition to have Chinese food at temple. And Fran's like, no, after temple, honey, after temple. And then she hands Gracie something, which we'll talk about later, telling her, go eat that. But if anyone asks, it's turkey. So Sylvia has basically pushed her way into the crowd surrounding the cantor. And she tells him, "Gary, gorgeous service." And Gary responds, "Always a joy to sing the wonders of God's universe." And Sylvia's like, yeah, I want you to meet my daughter. And Fran's like, "Oh, no need to push, Ma." And then she pushes other people out of the way.
Yes.
And so she introduces herself to Gary, and Gary comments, "I don't think I've seen you here before because I would have remembered." And Fran's like, "Oh, I've been temple shopping. Nothing's really popped. I haven't been here since I was a kid in Sunday school. What was that, Ma? 10 years ago?" And the same woman who had been sitting behind them, who had shushed them, says, "Oh, please, 10 years ago, she was babysitting my Rachel." Well, Sylvia says, you're lucky we're in temple, Sarah. So Fran says to Gary, "So, cantor, Gary, I work for Maxwell Sheffield, the Broadway producer. If ever you or your wife want to get theater tickets." Gary volunteers, "Oh, I'm not married." "No," says Fran and Sylvia. And he says, "But I love the theater, so if you'd like to come with me sometime." And in the same Cheshire cat way, Fran and Sylvia lean forward and say, "Yes." At which point Gracie tries to fulfill her role and says, "Excuse me, miss." Fran says, "Yes, little girl. Are you Julia Child?" Not quite the same.
Nope.
No. Do you want to add anything?
No, just the comment of Fran doesn't really think long term, because
No.
if she starts dating him, he's gonna find out who Gracie is.
That was my thought as well. It doesn't make any sense. Anyway, would you like to take us to scene 3?
Yes. So we are in the area of the Sheffield's living room where the grand piano is. And Maxwell, Niles, and Cece are standing around a man who we learn is Burt Bacharach. And he's singing "I'm Always Gonna Be There." They enjoy it. He finishes, they all clap. And, then Cece, being Cece, after, Maxwell's praising it, how great it is. And she's like, "Yeah, and imagine when we get someone who can sing." Pause. "Like you," trying to dig herself out of the hole. And Niles just comments to her, "I hope you know the way to San Jose."
Exactly.
So, Maxwell, I think, makes the comment of the last person who played that piano was Marvin Hamlish. And so Bert's like, "Oh, are you going to do a show with him?" No, it was a social thing. A party for Mavish? No, it was an awards thing. "Oh, Mavish got another award?" It's like this whole exchange.
Right.
between them, and a little uncomfortable. And then um, Fran walks in with Gary through the front door. Oh, Miss Fine, come meet, Bert Bacharach, which is
Bacharach, yeah.
yeah, which is like Maxwell's not one to really enthusiastically introduce Fran to anybody.
No, no, timing is everything in life. If Fran hadn't walked in right there, Maxwell
Mhm.
probably would not have introduced her as voluntarily.
Nope. And so of course she's gushing. She has all of his albums. Her father would be so jealous. Oh, because of the songs. No, 'cause he married Angie Dickinson.
Mhm.
Uh, and then she introduces Gary to them. Mentions, he's a singer, and he starts singing. Um, I say a little prayer for you,
Mhm. But he
and
notes that, sometimes if things get too somber at Temple, I'll do one of your numbers, and that's when
yes,
he starts singing.
yes, and he starts kind of singing it directly to Fran, right? Kind of a serenade,
Yes.
even like holds her in a way, and uh, Cece's like, "Oh, that's lovely. Run along, Nanny. Fine." Um, and then Bert mentions, "Oh, I want him to be in the show," and she's like, "Oh, never mind. Come back, come back." Um, and Gary, of course, is so excited at the prospect. He never thought this would ever happen, but then he pulls out a card. "Oh,
Mhm.
you have an agent at William Morris?" "Yeah, I did a son's bar mitzvah. I didn't write down the exact wording he used, but
And
like
I've
on
got to tell you, I was smoking.
yes. Um, and Fran goes on like, "Oh, it'll be great. Women will love him. There'll be women lined up outside the stage door ready to slip him their number." And then she, of course, has that like look of realization on her face. And so she kind of backtracks a bit with Maxwell, like, "Well, we don't even know the man and if he can dance."
Right,
So after she realizes, "Oh, this might not be good for me," she kind of backs off it a little bit.
right.
Do you have anything to add to that scene?
The only thing I want to add is that when Gary is serenading Fran, Maxwell's face, I don't know if you
Uh,
noticed,
yeah.
but he was not a happy camper, to
Oh,
put
oh
it
yeah.
nicely.
Nope. Nope. Okay. Do you want to
So
take it to the kitchen?
I would love to. So Fran is very excited. Looky here, a $500 check just fell out of the friendly skies. And she's saying this to Niles, who says to her, "Have you thought that taking this check might be construed as fraud?" And she's like, "Well, I don't know, Mr. 14 Dependents." And he's like folding laundry, and he looks at her and he says, "And it's not easy for me to support them considering I'm a student. Now, would you
Yeah.
get out of my home office?"
Indeed.
And so Fran tells him that her mother invited her and Gary to dinner, and that her mother is even taking the plastic covers off the couch. And she explains that the last time that happened, we found her macrame string bikini. "Your mother used to wear a string bikini?" To which Fran says, "She still does. You just can't see it anymore." And Niles gets a look on his face.
Mm-hmm.
And I know how you feel about that exchange.
Yeah. We could have done without that, right?
It was sort of unnecessary. I
Yep.
agree. Yeah, do you want to add anything?
No, we then find ourselves at Sylvia's house. And of course, because the plastic has been taken off the couch, first of all, there's a lot of people milling about. But Sylvia's at the couch wiping something, and there's a man saying, "I'm so sorry, Sylvia. You think it will stain? What, Rabbi? Red wine?" But she's like, Sylvia's calm, relatively, and she kind of muttered, "It's a blessing." And they further comment how, he'll come out with like the chewing gum and the peanut butter. He also apparently tracked into the house. Gary's standing a few feet away, and he's apparently enjoying a blueberry pie because he, tells the rabbi, "You should try this pie." And of course, Fran and Sylvia intervene with that because they don't want yet another thing for the rabbi to
Exactly.
fulfill. Um, And is it is it Gary who calls Sylvia the candy spelling of the Temple Beth Shalom?
I think it's Fran.
Okay, Fran. Okay. Um, because then, because Gary's commenting about, how many people are there and stuff. And then he also asks Fran where her father is. And she's like, oh, he's over there. Oh, he dropped a fork. And so all the audience sees is like legs, someone bending over to pick up a fork and a toupee falling onto the floor.
Yep.
And then Fran kind of, again, they're talking about like this party, and Fran's saying, oh, maybe you need to drink some coffee because this group here can go until like 8, maybe 9.
Right.
She's talking about how, he should get used to this kind of partying, once he's made it on Broadway. And I think he calls her adorable.
He says, oh, Franny, you are so adorable. Have I thanked you? Do you know the rest of the line?
Wait until I've done everything. Oh, because he says, have I told you how like grateful I am for everything you've done? And she says, wait until I've done everything or something like that.
Yeah, then you'll really have something to be thankful for.
Yeah. And then Sylvia again points out that there are some celebrities in the room. You look over there; those are cousins to the owners of Wilson's House of Suede. But they don't want attention. They like to be treated like normal people.
Right.
Anyway, Gary has an announcement to make, and of course, like Sylvia and Fran. And just a side note, we don't really get a sense of time, like how much time has passed um,
Right.
between Fran meeting him and all this happening. But suffice it to say, it hasn't been too terribly long.
No.
Of course, Fran and Sylvia immediately jump to, oh, announcement must be, an engagement. But,
Exactly.
and so like before he starts talking though, too, I think Sylvia is trying to get the gravy boat away from the rabbi.
Right. She tells Morty to take the gravy boat away from the rabbi.
Yes.
Does
So
Morty do it?
no, he does not.
Continue.
Because again, Gary's now the center of attention. He starts by saying being a cantor was the most rewarding, you know,
Thing in his life until he met
yeah.
Fran.
But then he met Fran. Um and he's
I have the whole thing if you want it.
Okay, if you want to say it verbatim.
Okay. My friends, I truly believed that being a cantor was the most rewarding thing in my life until I met Fran. Boy. Fran, I want to tell you something, and I hope that you can accept. Boy, my deepest thanks for making my dreams come true. And by the way, the oys were from Sylvia, not from Gary.
Yeah.
And
And both Sylvia and Fran kind of lift up their left hand.
And their ring fingers specifically.
Yep.
And Gary continues, I want you to be the first to know that I'm leaving the temple to pursue a career on Broadway.
Yep. And we cut to the rabbi pouring gravy on the lady next to him.
He's leaving the temple.
And you hear someone say, this is all Sylvia's fault.
Mm-hmm.
Before the scene is over. Anything else you want to add to that scene?
Nope.
Okay. Take us to the living room then.
So we're now in the living room and Gary is practicing. He's singing. He's rehearsing for the show. And Maxwell tells him that he's fabulous. I just wish I could offer you a larger part, but you're going to stop the show in the second act. And Gary's like, well, do I get my own dressing room? And Maxwell's like, oh, good, you do comedy too. The rehearsal is interrupted by Cece coming in shouting, Maxwell, it's your worst nightmare.
And it is the most dramatic.
Yeah, I didn't do that justice. I'm sorry.
No,
I'm sorry, listeners.
I was laughing when she did it.
she like races in and she has her like arm, she's like flinging her arms about. Maxwell, it's your worst nightmare. Is that any better? I can't tell anymore.
Yeah.
Um, well, Niles interjects, will you stop announcing yourself? I'll be out of a job. And
Mhm.
we find out from Cece that the lead in their show got hit by a bus. And
Mhm.
Maxwell gets up. Cece, you can't be serious. Oh my God, this is a disaster. We're just going to have to put on the understudy. And Cece's like, Maxwell, aren't you even going to ask how he is? Oh,
Mhm.
yes, of course, you're right. How is he? The understudy stinks.
Yep.
And, then we hear Gary continuing to sing, still rehearsing. Are you thinking what I'm thinking?
Oh,
Asks
just
Maxwell.
a side comment.
Go
It's like
ahead.
obvious that he's been listening, I think, because he
I,
really hams it up.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
Um, so Maxwell asks, are you thinking what I'm thinking? And Cece's like, a man just died. Life is short. We should go upstairs and she's like pulling at her scarf around her neck. And
Yeah.
Maxwell clearly does not hear a word she says and adds, hire Gary. And Cece's like, hire Gary? Kinky? Oh, you mean for the show?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep. So we then cut to the kitchen. Brighton's there, and Sylvia and Fran are walking in, and Sylvia's wearing some sunglasses. And Fran tells her, okay, Ma, you can take off the sunglasses. And basically, Sylvia is trying to be in disguise because she doesn't want anybody from Temple to see her and give her the evil eye. And
Right.
Fran's is like, you can't wear a disguise. You like I do, you have a very distinctive voice, as if she doesn't. Um, and Sylvia says, no, I'm leaving it on. I can see it just fine. I can see just fine. And she goes and she sits down at the table and she kind of pulls. Brighton was eating some type of dessert and she pulls it over. She takes the cake and tells him, go play with your brother and the little one. And Brian's just kind of like confused, but doesn't say anything, gets up and leaves. And as he leaves, Sylvia comments, that haircut is awful on her. So clearly
Exactly.
she has mistaken Brian for Maggie. Um, and again, Sylvia is trying to convince Fran that she needs to tell Maxwell to basically fire Gary so that he comes back to the temple. And Fran points out, I don't tell him what to do. I don't run his life. We're not married. And and I think it's Sylvia or is it Fran lamenting Sylvia's lamenting that Blockbuster, like the temple's dying and
It's
like
Sylvia.
yeah, Sylvia says, temple's dying, Blockbuster videos already measuring the for a parking lot. And that's when Gary and Maxwell
Yep.
does it come in and we learn that Gary is going to be taking the main role of the show. And at first, Fran's a little excited, but her mom's there. So she says Chickapee instead.
Yeah.
And again at this point too, Gary kind of tries to see if he's going to get a higher salary for, since now he's the lead and um Maxwell just kind of dryly says, there's that comic timing again, comedic timing. And anyway, I think Gary leaves at this point.
Yeah. So he's told to go get measured for his costume.
Yes. So we just have Fran, Sylvia, and um
Maxwell.
Max.
Yeah.
And again, this is where Fran attempts to tell Maxwell, you know, um, we don't really know him. Your show is like your baby. Would you really trust your kids to the first stranger that walks off the street? And she realized what she's saying, so she adds again.
Exactly.
And then again, there's
So Maxwell says Miss Fine, the man, is a tremendous talent.
yes. And he's going to be rich and famous or something like that.
Yep.
And Sylvia though is not happy. I want my Cantor back. And she goes on to say, like if not, she wants to die. But she's eating something because she asks if there's an almond extract in it.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a contract involved, and Fran's trying to convince her mom, like, accept this like a grown up. It's 2 against 1. And Sylvia's like, no, it's not. I have a higher, you know,
Higher power.
on my side, and ours is not a merciful God. And she leaves out the kitchen door, and Fran thinks, oh, whatever. But then she steps on something. She's like, why is a locust here?
Yup.
Is there anything you'd like to add?
No.
Okay, can you take us to the next scene?
So we're in the foyer, the front of the Sheffield home, and Fran and Val are talking, and Val comments that it's been raining for 7 days and 7 nights. You don't think your mother was right? To which Fran says, shut up, Val. And Niles chimes in, God is forgiving, Miss Fine. I once took 5 shillings out of the collection plate at church for toffee. And Fran's like, and nothing happened to you, right? And he's like, that's right. Absolutely nothing. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to wash other people's underwear. And he walks off.
Mm-hmm.
And so Maxwell comes in and he says, you have to listen to the advanced publicity. And he has the newspaper and he's reading Maxwell Sheffield has struck gold in newcomer Gary Isaacs. Yada, yada, yada. Maxwell Sheffield has assured himself the big new hit of the season. So much for your mother putting a whammy on us, eh? On the contrary, it seems God has sent us both a nice Jewish boy. And Fran says, oh, I was never worried. If God listened to a word Ma said, I'd be living in a mansion with a handsome millionaire, gorgeous kids. She forgot to say married.
Uh-huh.
And so the doorbell rings and Fran goes and answers it. And that's when Gary arrives. And, they hug each other in a sort of awkward embrace, if you ask me. And Fran comments that Mr. Sheffield was just reading me the article. And he's like, no, it's already in the paper that I'm flying off to do a movie. What movie? And the lightning flashes. Oh, I'm doing a part in Evita for Andrew Lloyd Webber. And Max was like, oh no, I knew it. Andrew Lloyd Webber is God. And Fran's like, Gary, you can't just walk out on Mr. Sheffield without at least 2 weeks notice and an engagement ring. And Max was like, now, wait a minute, Miss Fine, we're behaving dreadfully. I mean, this is an opportunity of a lifetime for Gary, and we should wish him well. And, Gary thanks him and says to Fran, Fran, my whole life, all I ever thought about was settling down and getting married. And then I met you, and you changed all that. And Fran, yeah, exactly. Fran's like, how ironic. Well, have a safe flight. You're going in this weather, I hope. She slams the door. She closes the door behind him. And she says, oh, can you believe that guy? Doesn't he know how much money has already been invested in him? Musicians have been hired. Rehearsals have been scheduled. People have been working around the clock. And that's just for my wedding. What about your show? And Max was like, oh, don't worry, Miss Fine. Gary isn't going anywhere. He has an ironclad contract. Does Gary have an ironclad contract? Nope.
No.
Cece walks in and she says, oh, is that Gary I just saw getting into a limo? Oh, well, I'll have him sign his contract at the theater tomorrow morning. No rush, says Maxwell. And he's smoking a cigar. He gets up at this point and he says, you see, it's happened again. He's talking to Fran. I let you get involved in my life. At the time, it seemed like a good idea, as it always does. But then it isn't. I haven't finished with you yet. But first, I have to go bludgeon Cece with the Tony. And he walks off, and Niles, of course, exclaims, ooh, and follows him.
Yes.
And Val, who's been there this whole time, says, Fran, maybe God is getting even with you for taking the Cantor away from the temple. And Fran's like, you mean because Mr. Sheffield wants to kill me and now I have no boyfriend? No, there's nothing out of the ordinary about that. And she's like sifting through papers on the table in the foyer. Oh my God, look, I missed the Loman's year-end clearance sale. Why are you doing this to me?
Yep.
I think we have a good idea why God is doing this to her. Just
Mm-hmm.
saying. Do you want to add anything?
Oh, no.
All right. Would you like to take us back to the synagogue?
Yes. So in our last scene of the episode, we are back at the temple. Sylvia and Fran walk in. Everybody kind of looks at them, and Fran and Sylvia end up sitting in the very back. And, and they lament that they've been exiled to Siberia.
Right.
And Sylvia in particular is like reminiscing about, I got to sit, I used to sit up there with um, the vicious backstabbers. We had so much fun. And I guess like right in front of them in the pew is Debbie.
Not me.
Yep, different Debbie. And she apparently has like an engagement ring on because Fran exclaims, "She's engaged? Who am I, Job?" And then Sylvia has pulled out a BLT sandwich, and Fran's like, "Ma, like, and she's like, nobody can see us back here anyway." Um, but she is a little bit messy, so Fran pulls out some tissues for her to wipe her face, but in doing so, she accidentally also hands her the $500 check she got from the Friendly Skies. And Fran, like Sylvia, was like, a $500 check, and Fran's like, "Oh yeah, yeah, that's what I got from thing. Why is God punishing me?" And the rabbi walks past them at this point. There's thunder. Fran has a realization. And she hurries after the rabbi and hands him the check, donation to the temple, donation. And he tells the rabbi tells her, "God bless you, Franny." And as soon as she sits back down, we see that someone had been talking to Sylvia. Oh, so and so's retiring to Boca. So we have first dibs we're first on the list for seating in the front.
For the high holy days.
Yeah, the high holy days. And then right in front of them, Debbie and her fiance get in a fight, and she yells, "The engagement is off," and she leaves. And Fran kind of like comments, "God may work in mysterious ways, but he sure moves like that."
Exactly.
And then so Fran and Sylvia together start praying to find Fran a doctor.
Find me a doctor. Find me a doctor. Find
Find
me a
a
doctor.
doctor. Yeah.
Exactly. They do it in sync so perfectly.
Yep. So do you have anything to add in that last scene?
I don't. That's the episode.
Yep, that is the episode. So before we jump into our shticks, I wanted to ask you something.
Sure. I hope I have an
Did you
answer.
feel any chemistry between Fran and Gary?
Not really.
No, I
Except
either.
except when he was singing to her.
Uh-huh.
That's the only time there was even a hint of chemistry.
Yeah, so I have a little bit of a cynical view on Gary, I think.
You don't say.
So I'm curious about what your thoughts are. But I'm like, Fran led with, I I work for the producer, Maxwell Sheffield. This is when she was kind of trying to find out if he was married, right?
But she already knew he wasn't married.
I know, but leading with that, that almost makes me think that that's kind of what caught his interest, was that potential connection. Because again, later when he's kind of trying to like be like, "Oh, like, I never thought this could happen," but he pulls out a card with his agent.
Mm-hmm.
It makes it seem like, nope, there was a kind of a plan. And that's a bit of a cynical view on him. So I wanted to see what your impression was.
I guess that's fair. I never thought of it like that. Um, I mean, to me, the whole scene where the games are beginning in synagogue doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. I mean, as we've already pointed out, Fran tells Gracie to rush up and say, "Excuse me, mister, you Julia Roberts," as if like he'd never see Gracie again, which is silly. And then like the fishing, like, "Oh, if you or your wife ever want theater tickets," but she knows he's not married. Like the games really have begun, I guess. I don't know. I didn't care for it.
But I also was like totally not surprised that he bailed. And I will point out one other thing though. I think it's unfair of Maxwell to blame this on Fran. Fran didn't push this. She even in that scene when they offer him that role tells him when she realizes that it would attract women to him is like, but do we really know him? Do we know if he can dance? So I don't feel like she had as big a role in this.
That's a good point.
You know, like
But
it's not because of her that, you know, the only part she really had to play was introducing him, right?
bingo.
Bringing him back to the house. He's the one who started like I guess she did say, you know, sing, but he's the one who kind of sang and it was up to the others to actually hire him.
Yeah, I mean, it was Burt Bacharach's fault.
Yeah.
But he wasn't there to take the blame.
And then it was Cece and Maxwell's decision to hire him for the lead role.
Correct. And Cece's decision not to make him sign his contract.
Yeah, right away. So it's not Fran's fault, is my point. And in this particular situation.
In this situation, unlike many other situations where it is clearly Fran's fault.
Yes.
No, that's a really good point.
Mm-hmm. But again, it's interesting to me that there's this we've seen time and again how like Fran immediately jumps to, oh, he's gonna propose.
Well, of course that's her assumption. That's like one of I don't want to call it the running gag, but like it is a running gag. Like every man in Fran's life who, you know, is not her father,
who sticks around for more than one scene.
pretty, and even some that don't stick around for more than one scene. Yeah. Anyway,
Yep.
yeah.
Did you have any thoughts you wanted to talk about before we jump in?
No, I think I'm ready to jump into the shticks. We've got a lot this week.
Yep, we do. So I guess jumping into favorite fashion. Did you have any favorite fashion this week?
I did. I really liked the suits that Fran and Sylvia wore in the last scene. Fran's is like this beautiful baby pink, and Sylvia's is a wonderful neon green. Very 90s.
I had a feeling you would appreciate those colors.
I do. Those are my favorite. Those are my favorite fashion in this episode. Did you have any favorite fashion?
I don't think anything particularly stuck out to me to be favorite. I'm wondering,
What did you?
so like I will note this a little bit ties into 90s nostalgia, but Gracie's dress that she wore to Temple was like a navy and dark green combined like velvet dress. It was long and it just made me think that was a very 90s look.
Yeah, absolutely. What did you think of what Fran wore the first time we go to Temple? So she has that big black hairband in her hair. She has the, you know, see-through but black tights, black skirt, black so her usual like black attire with something over it, but then she has like a corset bustier thing that has sparkles.
Yeah, I would have expected that more for going out night on in the town versus going to Temple.
Fair. I didn't like the way the corset cut. I thought it was like the wrong height. Like if it had been higher, that would have been better. If it had been lower, that would have been better. It was just like an awkward cut. And I did not care for that. What about what she wore to the party at Sylvia's house? The sparkly suit. And again, she's wearing the same black hairband.
Was it like with the shorts?
I thought it was just a short skirt.
Oh, okay.
It was like silver and sparkly. It was basically like a suit, and she had a black shirt underneath it, but it was like the silver fabric, silver sparkly fabric.
Oh, okay. Apparently it didn't stick out too much to me. What were
That,
you?
that's fine. It was just, it was similar. It's similar to the other suits she's worn, just silver and sparkly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I will know. I think when she first brings Gary back to the house, her outfit made me think kind of spring. It was like very bright, and she had like I think a headband that was like maybe a pink, or I don't know.
I'm not gonna lie, I don't recall what she wore in that scene.
My impression was spring. Not my favorite or anything, but that was the impression I got.
Oh yeah, it was a light colored hairband and then a floral suit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, not my favorite either.
Yeah. Any other fashion you wanted to talk about?
I just wanted to comment on what Cece wore in her scene where she's like, Maxwell, it's your worst nightmare. She's wearing a white coat and a beret, and I mean, I think we've seen the white coat before, but she has the hat on. It's anyway.
I have to say, she's flailing her arms in this, isn't she?
Yeah, she is. It's so not like her. But her conclusion is we should go, a man just died, life is short, we should go upstairs. And she's like pulling on her black scarf. It's like, what did you think was going to happen, Cece? What did you really think?
Yeah.
Anyway, exactly. Oh, Cece. And then I'm out when it comes to favorite fashion, unless you have something else you want to talk about.
Nope. We'll move on to notable New Yorkers. And again, right off the bat in this episode, well, I guess it's not right off the bat because we start in the kitchen talking about the Cantor. But I mean, I don't know if you had anything in that first scene. I didn't really have aside from that reference to fleeing, but I didn't know if you were wanting to talk about that in Yiddish Cop.
I had the Anatevka reference under notable New Yorkers because we've got a lot in Yiddish Cop tonight.
Okay.
So Anatevka is a reference to Fiddler on the Roof, which everyone should watch. Very important. All right, I'm done. In that scene, there was also Padres playing the Mets. Those are both baseball teams. Pagliacci is an Italian opera that translates to clowns, and it tells the story of Canio, an actor who murders his wife and her lover during an onstage performance.
Wow.
That's according to our friends at Wikipedia. The Met, we've talked about previously. It's a very famous art museum in New York, which presents art from over 5,000 years and from around the world. That's according to our friends at metmuseum.org. Brad Pitt is referenced.
Yes.
With the
I totally skipped a page in my notes because yes, there were actually a ton of references in that first scene.
It's fine. My notes are not in order, so I had to be like, I know there's something. We've talked about Brad Pitt before. He needs no further explanation. And then I think we're into scene 2.
Yes, and that's where we get, Julia Roberts, who is different from Julia Child.
Yes, Julia Roberts is an American actress who's known for her leading roles in a variety of genres. Notable credits include Pretty Woman, My Best Friend's Wedding, and Erin Brockovich. That's according to our friends at Wikipedia. Julia Child, on the other hand, was an American author, television personality, teacher, and chef known for bringing French cuisine to the American public. That's according to our friends at Wikipedia also.
Mm-hmm. And then we get into Burt Bacharach.
You missed the M&Ms melting in Fran's hand.
Okay.
That is a reference to an M&M ad campaign, I think from the 90s.
Campaign?
Yeah, where they advertised as saying, melt in your mouth, not in your hands.
Oh, interesting. I didn't, I mean, I obviously knew what M&Ms were, but I didn't realize it was a reference to a specific campaign.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't look that up. I just remember that from childhood. So the timing could be off. So, some of us really enjoy our chocolate. I'm just saying.
So Burt Bacharach?
So Burt Bacharach is an American pianist, songwriter, composer, and record producer who was very popular from the 1950s to the 1980s. That's according to our friends at Wikipedia. According to our friends at stljewishlight.org, he is a Jewish American composer who was born in Kansas City, Missouri.
And there's like several of his songs throughout this episode.
Oh, he's going to be there. Yeah, there's also Way to San Jose. Do you know the Way to San Jose?
Mm-hmm.
I Say a Little Prayer.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the ones I caught.
Yep. And then we have another reference to Marvin Hamlish, who we saw
Yep.
a couple of episodes ago.
Yep.
And what's funny too is that technically within the world of the Nanny, it wasn't actually Marvin who played the piano.
Correct.
But it really actually was Marvin who played the piano in real life. So
exactly. And actually, I took that whole scene where Maxwell was like, "Oh, the last person to play the piano was Marvin Hamlish." I took that as him boasting and lying, which is why it was super awkward when Burt Bacharach was like, "Oh, are you doing a show with him?" And he's like, "No, like it was a social thing." "Oh, you had a party?" "No, he's getting an award." "Oh, another award." Like it's all made up.
But Cece is probably still under the impression that it actually was Marvin, right?
True.
So awkward, to say the least.
Oh, absolutely.
Angie Dickinson,
an American actress whose career began on television before she broke onto the big screen. And that's according to our friends at Wikipedia.
William Morris,
a very famous ad representation company. We talked about them many moons ago. They were referenced previously.
Mm-hmm. Now, for this is a little bit, but for any listeners who haven't done taxes or anything in the U.S., the whole conversation that Fran has with Niles regarding whenever Niles is like, "Don't you think that's fraud?" And he's like, "Oh, Mr. 14 dependents." And then there's the whole student thing and home office. So those are different kind of deductibles for tax purposes in the US. So I just wanted to point that out.
Right. That's a good note. That'll tie into our future fun discussion.
Ooh. So
I think we missed.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say Candy spelling.
That is one I admit I missed.
Okay.
She is according to our friends at Wikipedia, she is an American author, philanthropist, and theater producer who is married to Aaron Spelling until he died in 2006. That's again according to our friends at Wikipedia.
And I'm assuming she's the mother of Tori Spelling.
Yes, and Randy Spelling.
Okay. What was the one you think we missed?
I was going to say our friend Andrew Lloyd Webber.
Yes, he's everywhere.
He is. Evita.
Mm-hmm.
We actually have talked about this episode before in our future fun segments about Fran's boyfriend, the Cantor, leaving to do a part in Evita for Andrew Lloyd Webber. So I'm full circle.
Yep.
Nell, Fran, in that scene in the kitchen where Fran starts to congratulate Gary, but then ends up saying Chickapee. She's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I rented Nell yesterday." Nell is a 1994 drama starring Jodie Foster, which focuses on a young woman learning to face other people after being raised in isolation with her mother. And that's according to our friends at Wikipedia.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot that is going to go to Yiddish Cop, I'm sure, in terms of references to things.
Yeah, I have like a page. I have more than a page. So
yeah, there's like a ton in this episode.
I think this is probably the most Jewish episode of The Nanny.
Which makes sense.
Yeah.
In a way.
Right. Which is actually interesting because our friends at Kveller actually have a list of the 11 most Jewish episodes of The Nanny, and this one is not at the top of the list.
Really?
Yeah, this one is number 8. I mean, it comes after shows we've talked about before, like Here Comes the Brood from season 1. That's the episode where they end up crashing Fran's cousin's wedding because Gracie ran away and took a limo.
Mm-hmm.
The Christmas Show, which was in season 1. Ode to Barbara Joan, also season 1. Everybody Needs a Booby, sometimes. That's season 2. Dope Diamond, we talked about earlier this season. Unkindest Cut, we talked about this season. Same thing with the Kibbutz. But like, I don't know if they maybe they put this in order of episodes, which would then make a lot more sense, because to me this is the most Jewish episode of The Nanny. All right.
Yeah. Speaking of, I guess, do you have any other notable New Yorkers before we transition to Yiddishkeit?
Only as listed in Yiddishkeit. So
okay, because there's a ton.
Okay, so first, Cantor, the episode of the show is the Cantor Show. If you didn't gather from this episode, the Cantor, Gary, is he or she is one of the religious leaders in a synagogue, and they typically sing and they help people learn how to chant Torah and things like that. In the transition from scene after the theme song to the first scene in the synagogue, we see the outside of Hillcrest Jewish Center, which is a real synagogue in Flushing, Queens. According to their webpage, it is and I quote, a traditional egalitarian congregation affiliated with the United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism, which seeks to foster love of Judaism and the Jewish people through study of Torah, the performance of mitzvot, meaningful prayer, the performance of acts of chesed, or loving kindness, and to inspire our members to engage in tikkun olam, making this world a better place in which to live. I thought their little bio was adorable. That's why I wanted to quote it. At the start of that scene, we hear Gary singing Bayom Bayom Hahu. That is actually a Jewish prayer. It has been put to music by different composers, including Debbie Friedman. When you look at the bima, that's where the cantor is singing, like he was standing behind a podium and singing. You see behind him where the Israeli flag and the US flag. And that's something you will see in most synagogues. And according to our friends, there was a blog post on jewishjournal.com, and they quoted one of the responses. So they quoted a rabbi who was asked the question, why? And they said, though the flags are not religious symbols, they are symbols of our spiritual and emotional attachment to our country and to the state of Israel, which I thought was a very good way of explaining why. Also on the bima, we saw a menorah, and you saw that it had seven arms instead of the traditional 9 that you would see on a Hanukkah, which we've talked about this previously. The 9 is for Hanukkah, and 7 is a regular menorah or candelabra. We also see in the back, behind the cantor and the rabbi who is sitting there, we also see the ark, which is where the Torah are kept. We also see the 10 Commandments in Hebrew. I should mention the rabbi who we see both in this scene, in the first scene, or in the scenes in the synagogue, and also in the Fine Family Home. The rabbi is the spiritual leader of the synagogue or congregation. Rabbi literally translates to teacher. One thing that I've always found really interesting is that synagogues will pay their rabbis based on their level of education. So the more educated they are, the higher their pay is, because we value education so much. The rabbi is wearing a white and blue talit. That is a prayer shawl. I feel like I'm just sort of rambling, but there were a lot here. So, this was Friday. We saw Friday night services. And I think I've mentioned on a previous episode that all Jewish holidays begin at sundown on the night before. And so this would be a Friday night Shabbat service. There are some Reform synagogues that only do a Friday night service instead of also a Saturday morning service, but more conservative shuls will do both. And according to our friends at Reform Judaism, they actually have a whole webpage titled Everything You Need to Know About Shabbat Services. And so they explain that Shabbat, the Jewish Sabbath, and I'm quoting from them, is a weekly holiday that celebrates creation and offers a respite from the hectic pace of the rest of the week. Shabbat begins at sundown on Friday and ends with Havdalah, a short ceremony that separates Shabbat from the rest of the week on Saturday evening. Fran makes a reference to tells Gary that she's been temple shopping, meaning she's looking for a new spiritual home, and that she hasn't been here since she was a kid in Sunday school. For those who are confused, Sunday school is actually when Jews schedule their religious school. So I couldn't quite find a great explanation for why. My explanation, which again, not a rabbi, but my explanation would be that we would expect our students to write and take notes, and we don't write on Shabbat because that's a form of work. Of the people who Fran and Sylvia interact with in synagogue, there's Sarah and Rachel. Those are both names that are names of Jewish matriarchs. I won't go into all of their stories, but I thought that was worth noting. The cantor is wearing a yarmulke or a kippah on his head. That's the skull cap or that Jewish men will wear. He references a bar mitzvah. We've talked about that previously. There's that statement. So Gary says to Fran, have I thanked you for all you've done for me? And she responds, just wait till I've done everything for you. Then you'll really have something to thank me for. I sort of thought that would be an interesting place to put in a note about premarital sex in Judaism. And the reason I want to throw that in there is because my Jewish Learning recently had a piece on this. And the bottom line that I took from it was that premarital sex is not as forbidden as one would expect. It is frowned upon, but it's not Talmudically prohibited. And within the Reform and to a lesser extent in the conservative movements, the ideal is still marital sex, but they recognize that in a society where people aren't marrying until they're in their 30s or later, premarital sex is likely and therefore should be conducted following the same ethical principles that would govern married sex. Basically, respect for all humans as being created in the image of God. Let's see. Okay. So Sylvia makes the comment about, those people own Wilson's house of suede. I think that's a reference to Jewish geography, which is a game that Jews often play. Like when you're visiting or you're someplace new, you start to try to figure out who do I know, who you know within the Jewish community. And sometimes it works out really funny. The evil eye reference from Sylvia, we've talked about that very early on in the podcast. Ayin hara, which is that's the Hebrew. It's the idea that a person or a supernatural being is able to bewitch or harm someone merely by looking at them. There's the locust. That is a reference to the 10 plagues from the Passover story. Bacon is not kosher. Pig is not kosher. I've said this multiple times. And then the raining for 7 days and 7 nights. I think that's supposed to be a reference to the story of Noah, but I'm pretty sure it was raining for 40 days and 40 nights there.
Yeah.
And then the last one, which is actually from our friends at IMDb, Fran donating the fraudulently obtained funds. And I quote from our friends at IMDb, gifting ill-gotten gains to the temple is an offense in itself under Jewish law and would be an act abhorrent to the Lord. So it would be unlikely to assuage his wrath. So, and again, that's from the very religious source of imdb.com. So
yeah. There's also Maggie's comment about Chinese food.
Yeah, I didn't write that down because I feel like every time I'm given the opportunity to get up on my high horse and talk about Jews and Chinese food.
You mentioned Christmas and all of that, but is it common to also eat it before Friday or after Friday service?
So I would say after is a little late. I mean, it sort of depends on what congregation and when they have their services. Also, I would say after doesn't really make a lot of sense by virtue of the fact that if you are a more conservative Jew, you would not be spending money to pay for the Chinese food on Shabbat because that's a form of work that would be forbidden. Mm-hmm. But the reason, again, very quickly, the reason Chinese food and Jews go hand in hand, when Jews started eating out at non-kosher restaurants, Chinese food was a easy step, if you will, because A, there was no mixing of meat and dairy, which is prohibited under kashrut, and B, everything is cut so small so that even if there is a forbidden piece of meat or a forbidden type of meat, it would probably not count as a prohibition because it would be smaller than half an olive. So,
and then So you were saying that the thing that Fran gave to Gracie in that scene was some
I
type of
think
pork product?
I think Maggie, I think it was ham,
Okay.
which
Don't.
would also not be kosher because
Yeah.
pigs are treif.
Yeah.
Again, for those who are keeping score at home, the uh, kashrus of meat when it comes to a land animal, it has to have split cloven hooves and chew its cud, and pigs don't do that.
Hmm.
So
Yep. Okay. Well, yeah, I think this is probably the most we've had in this shtick.
yeah, I mean there are two others. There's a reference to Job, which I'm not gonna lie, I don't fully understand. Um, and then there's
Trials.
what?
Isn't it like she's going through so many trials?
See, that makes so much more sense. I thought, because I was like, what does Job have to do with not being married yet? That was what I got hung up on. Yes,
Okay.
your interpretation makes way more sense. Um, and then there's that comment after when the rabbi is like, "Oh, Sylvia, do you think it will stain what rabbi red wine? It's a blessing." There's a Jewish parable that maybe, and the bottom line of it is, maybe this horrible thing is actually a blessing in disguise. So
Hmm.
try to make the best of things.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there was a lot there.
Hmm.
So thank you for letting me, go down that very long rabbit hole.
Yeah. That's the point of that shtick.
Yeah, and this time I actually got to go all the way down. So woo,
Yeah. Okay. So then are we ready for 90s nostalgia?
I think so. I'll let you
So
go first because I've done a lot of
yeah, I
talking.
mentioned Gracie's dress just seemed very 90s to me. The velvet, the length, the cut of it just seemed very 90s to me. Um, the other thing too is like I don't know what your take on this would be. Nowadays, it's so much easier to have contracts like emailed, like digitally signed, like all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
So, do you think him signing in person, would be as big of a need? You know what
I
I
don't
mean?
I don't think so, but I think that Cece probably would still have been negligent in not getting
Sending
it.
it to him, yeah,
Yeah,
or like making sure he's actually signed it.
exactly. Um, so I think they'd probably still be in the same boat. But it
Hmm.
would have, instead of a newspaper article, or Gary breaking the news, it probably would have been a social media post.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Again, I feel like Gary, this day and age would probably have his own like YouTube channel.
He probably would have a YouTube channel as the cantor of Hillcrest Jewish Center.
Yeah. But also just because I think, again, this is just my interpretation of his character, given that he had a agent lined up already. Like, I
Mhm.
think his goal had been, if at all possible, to do more,
So,
right?
so I mean, that's possible, but I guess that my counterpoint is my understanding is like cantors are like highly trained. So like they go to yeshiva and like it's years and years of education that he would then just be like walking away from. I don't know. That's my counterpoint.
Hmm. I don't know, but I feel like if he had a little bit of a showboat to him, like where he would just sing like the other songs, right?
Well, so that's actually not that strange to me.
Really,
Yeah, I mean, like
because like my impression was he was actually like trying to like catch their attention.
I suppose that's a fair interpretation. I mean, I know that different cantors use different inspiration
Hmm.
um, for how they present at services, and that they don't always use the same like traditional hymns or the traditional melodies, and so they might, you know, mix things up a little bit. I did think his comment that, if things get too somber, I'll, use one of your songs. Like it probably has to be highly choreographed because there's usually an accompanist who needs to know what's going on.
Yeah.
I will just say, to my prior point, according to our friends at Google, becoming a cantor requires a master's degree.
Interesting.
So, yeah. So it seems weird to me that he would just like give that up. Also, like, I think you'd become a cantor because that's what you want to do. I don't know. Your view of this as someone who hasn't seen this episode a million times and just taking it at face value is very interesting.
Yeah. Well, also because, I mean, he thanks Fran for making his dreams come true.
That's true.
Implied he dreamt of this. You know what I mean? They had some type of prior aspirations, but regardless, I think he would have a YouTube channel.
He probably would.
Anyway, do you have any 90s nostalgia?
Blockbuster Video measuring the parking lot of the synagogue.
Yep.
Old cars.
Yes, we did have that.
And then I'm out.
Yeah, me too.
Okay.
Fun?
So I'm going to start by actually harkening back to our notable New Yorkers. Magda Harut. She's the woman who plays Sarah. She was actually, according to our friends at IMDb, she was actually in season 1 of The Nanny. In the episode My Fair Nanny, she played Madame Moleska, the fortune teller. Okay. And she will also be back in season 4 in the episode Kissing Cousins. I also want to point out that Gary was played by Philip Kasnoff. He will not be on another episode of The Nanny, unsurprisingly. And also the guy who played the rabbi, his name was Manny Kleinmuntz. He apparently has been typecast as a rabbi multiple times. So I just wanted to mention that because I found that funny. All right, future fun. So I already hinted that, so about taxes, that Fran, as we already talked about, Fran references Niall's 14 dependents. In a later episode, Fran gets audited for, shall we say, her tax irregularities. She talks about her multiple dependents, including Donna, Karen, Rolf, Lauren, and her foreign exchange student, Haagen-Dazs. So 2 other things for future fun. In the very first scene of this episode, Fran is asked if anyone in her faith ever takes a vow of celibacy, and she says, just me. In season 5, Fran dresses up like a nun and realizes that she missed her calling as a woman who is completely celibate, and have I missed my calling? And then my last piece of future fun is next week we will see a proposal. I won't say who, but there is one next week. So yeah. Okay. We've got a good string of episodes ahead of us. So
okay. So time for episode rating.
Is it my turn or your turn?
It's my turn.
Okay.
As a reminder, we rate from 1 to 5 lipsticks, with 5 being the best. So again, struggling a little bit with what to give it.
Okay.
And so it's subject to change, but just comparing it to some of the other episodes we've had thus far in the season, and just given some of the irregularities and the lack of chemistry I felt, I'll give it a 4.
Okay. I'm giving it a 5. You're right. They don't with a critical eye, you're right. Fran and Gary do not have good chemistry. I've always liked this episode because I think it's funny. I like how Jewish it is. Um, I
You know what knocked it down a bit for me too is them blaming Fran. It's not her fault.
fair, fair, except for the fact that she introduced Gary to Maxwell and Burt Bacharach. So
Mhm.
I like this episode because it really everything comes full circle. Fran does something bad, Fran gets punished, Fran doesn't realize that she did something bad initially, but then she does. She tries to fix it, although as we've learned, not appropriately.
Yeah.
Um,
Maybe made it worse.
Probably made it worse, which actually might explain some of her bad luck in the coming weeks.
Mhm.
We'll see. I won't say anything about that. I really like it because, and also the look on Maxwell's face when Gary is serenading Fran just is wonderful. So,
Mhm.
and again, Cece's just utterly ridiculous.
Oh my gosh. Okay, I will say her flailing is
Exactly.
her nightmare. Oh my goodness. And Niles just being like, stop announcing yourself or I'll be out of the job.
Or even when Maxwell says to Fran, "I'm not done with you yet, but first I have to bludgeon Cece with a Tony," and now just goes "Ooh," and
Mhm.
walks off following him. Like there are so many good things. I also, back to the Jewishness of this episode, I think it's a good representation. It's not obviously not entirely perfect, but it's nice representation. It shows people that Jews are not scary or not completely foreign. It's good representation of a religious minority, which is nice. So
Mhm. Yeah. Anything else you wanted to talk about before we wrap up this episode?
I don't think so. How about you?
I do not.
All right. Well, that's all we have for you today. We hope you had a fine time with us as we revisited The Nanny. Join us next week when we'll be discussing episode 73, Green Card.
If you'd like to reach us on social media, you can find us on Twitter at Nanny Revisited. I will say, so long as that still exists.
Fair.
You can also send us email at a fine time nannyrevisited@gmail.com. Have a great week.